represent the three groups that are sponsoring tonight's program.
I was a legislator from that area beginning in 1974 when I was elected, and I served on the Natural Resources Committee. It was one of the committees that I served on in the legislature for 2 terms. And at that time we were dealing with water resource in terms of cleaning the environment, buying out the property rights of all the billboards. We did that during my time. Clean water, clean air. But we never thought about a large corporation coming and setting out to extract 1 million+ gallons a day, 365 days a year on average from any one particular aquifer. We need to think about this groundwater. We need to think about not what's happening today or tomorrow, because it's really not about us. It's about what will happen with the water if we don't do something about taking a measure of control. What will happen to the water 20 years, 15 years, 30 years, 40 years out? Will we lose control of it as a result? And we also wanted to try and place the groundwater with the same protection that the surface water has as a result of the Great Ponds Act, which was passed in like 1972, which gives, it's one water cycle. The groundwater, the surface water, it's all one water cycle. You can't separate the two. It's a strange little thing. The water comes up out of the ground, bubbles out, forms a little stream, and meanwhile it's under one set of laws, which gives it very little protection. And then it flows into a great pond, a pond of over 10 acres, and all of a sudden it has all the protection in the world. And then it flows out of the great pond and downstream and then fills up perhaps another little aquifer or a large aquifer, and it goes back into the old set of laws. It's about community. And that is the thing that really has stuck with me over the course of this battle. Because it's very disruptive in a community. And a community really has to decide with something as important as our groundwater, how we're going to treat this groundwater. And the way it's extracted, it's trucked from place to place. And we really have to decide, is that something we want in our communities? We live in rural communities. Up where I live, is it something we want? Trailer trucks, 100 of them a day coming in and 100 going out. But what happens with the tax issue when the TIFs are given? The tax increment financing, which can eliminate the property tax. All cases are a little bit different, so I know I'm making a rather broad general statement on this, but it can eliminate as much as 80% of the property tax for 30 years. That's picked up by the broad-based tax payers across the state. And so it puts pressure on all of our systems. It puts pressure on our roads, it puts pressure on our schools, it puts pressure on our way of life. It changes our way of life. And it's not just one town, but Stowe is part of that community. And Denmark is part of that community. And Brownfield is part of that community. And Lovell is part of that community. It's not just about Freiburg. It's about all of us. And so really what I think we have to do is have a discussion that goes across the state of Maine. And really, it's led me to understand completely that, even if you don't have water extraction, this is not a bad discussion to kind of think about what kind of community you would really like to live in. What types of things are important to you? And how does water fit into this? So what does that mean if we are giving up the allocation of that groundwater? What does that mean to our future potentially? How does all of this impact us? And I should say that in 2007, we did get past a pretty important piece of legislation, which placed large ground extraction under the Natural Resource Protection Act. Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Under the Natural Resource Protection Act, which means that before there can be a major extraction, there has to be a completely transparent public process, and there has to be an environmental impact study, and in addition to that, there has to be continuous monitoring that is paid for by the applicant or the extractor. And so that's helpful. It's helpful to the protection of the resource. We need to take it this other step, which is to extend all of the protection that surface water has to the groundwater. But I think it's a much bigger question to say, even if we protect the resource, is that what we want in our community? But they publicly said that they wanted to have 6 bottling plants in the state of Maine. They currently have 3. But they said, that they wanted to have 6 more after they already had 2, so that would be a total of 8. And they have 3, so there are 5 more that they're interested in.
Where are those 3?
The 3, one is in Kingfield, one is in Hollis, and one is at Poland Spring. So they are. But then there are many places where they are feeding water into the Kingfield plant, comes from Kingfield, Pierce Pond, and down in Rangeley. Actually, in Dallas Plantation. 2007 was a watershed research committee. And the watershed research committee, however, doesn't really have the funding. Now I'll tell you that the state geologist, gets all upset when I say that. He doesn't like that because we had $100,000 which was going to be appropriated for the committee, and last year, because of the budget crisis, they didn't appropriate it. And so Poland Spring and another organization gave the money for it. Not Poland Spring, Nestle. There's one watershed, not multiple watersheds, even if you're starting with a priority list and then looking at all the different uses. Because really what we're talking about is, in the long run, is how is it going to be allocated? Well, there are several pieces of legislation that are in Augusta. I have one that I got a person to sponsor, and we're getting some other people to sign on as co-sponsors, which would extend to the groundwater. It's very simple in its concept. It's 2 sentences. It just says it will extend the same protections for surface water to the groundwater. But as a really smart Harvard lawyer said, it's anything but simple, Jim.
And consulting with folks in Denmark on the water issues. And what I've been taking out of this work is clearly it's a local communities need to exert themselves and determine what is best for their community. We have a water law that distinguishes groundwater from surface water. We are one of only 2 states who still have this archaic distinction, who still have absolute dominion over groundwater, and yet we have surface water where in many instances, the Great Ponds in particular, there's total public access. So there's a total disconnect, schizophrenic disconnect between our water law and the state. And certainly amendments to the water law would make a difference. But the key is for, again, for communities to determine what they want. Shapley, I'll just do in the sort of manner of a brief case study. Shapley has proposed a very, very restrictive ordinance, what's called a rights-based ordinance, which essentially says we, the citizens of Shapley, have an inalienable right to control our community. And just because the state says you, the corporation, have certain rights, we don't think so. We are prepared, I'm prepared to represent them, I have committed to representing them in the most likely inevitable situation that if in fact they pass this ordinance, it will in fact be challenged by Nestle. There are 2 towns in New Hampshire that have passed it, but Nestle/Poland Springs doesn't have the stake in New Hampshire that they have in Maine. And it would be really a slap in the face for a Maine community to pass this sort of ordinance, which would essentially not allow Nestle to do any water extraction in Shapley and or Newfield. And as of 2 nights ago, a possibility in Lemoyne. my neighbor of Lemoyne. We had a standing room only water meeting. We had panelists, 2 women from New Hampshire and 2 women from Shapley Newfield talking about what they're doing, and there was great interest in Lemoyne. But in many respects, as we delve into the law, in many respects the law is on the people's side, and there are aspects of the law that will allow you to pursue the things you want to do to protect your own town.